I had 48 hours before my mother died. Not from cancer, from unpaid hospital bills. That's when the billionaire called with an offer: pretend to be his wife for 6 months, earn $300,000. One rule: don't fall in love with him. I lasted 4 months before I broke it. What I didn't know: he was already engaged to someone else, and she was about to destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. Before we dive into this emotional journey, if you're enjoying these stories of unexpected love and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change how you see the world. Now, let's begin. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Plaza Hotel ballroom, drawing every eye in the room to where I stood, trembling, mascara-streaked, wearing a borrowed designer gown that cost more than my annual salary. Across from me, Adrian Blackthorne, the tech billionaire who'd promised to save my dying mother, stared with an expression I couldn't quite read. His actual fiancée, Isadora Valentine, smiled like a cat who'd cornered a particularly pathetic mouse. "Did you really think," Isadora purred, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom, "that a man like Adrian would choose someone like you?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Because 3 months ago, I'd been stupid enough to believe in fairy tales. Stupid enough to think that maybe, just maybe, the contract marriage we'd agreed to had become something real. I was wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this disaster began, to the moment when desperation made me sign my soul away to a man who collected people the way others collected art. 48 hours earlier. The eviction notice was the pale yellow color of failure. I stared at it on my kitchen counter, a death certificate for my American dream, positioned directly next to the hospital bill that had already murdered my savings account, my credit score, and my ability to sleep through the night. $287,000. That's what it costs to keep your mother alive when cancer decides to set up permanent residence in her body. That's what experimental treatment runs when insurance companies look at your claim and laugh in bureaucratic monotone. That's what desperation tastes like when you're 26 years old, living in a Brooklyn studio apartment that's actually a converted broom closet, surviving on instant ramen and the slowly dying hope that your freelance graphic design career might somehow, miraculously, take off. Spoiler alert, it didn't. I was 3 bites into my 14th consecutive ramen dinner when my phone exploded with an unknown number. My first thought was debt collectors. They become as regular as my period and twice as painful. But debt collectors don't usually have British accents smooth enough to spread on toast. "Miss Ravenachan?" The voice belonged to someone who pronounced their vowels like they cost extra. "This is Genevieve Hartley, executive assistant to Adrian Blackthorne." My chopsticks clattered into my bowl, sending sodium-laden broth splashing across yesterday's unpaid bills. Adrian Blackthorne. The name alone carried weight: tech mogul, venture capitalist, and according to Fortune magazine, the 9th richest man under 40 with a net worth that made most people's life savings look like pocket change found between couch cushions. 6 months ago, his company had commissioned me for a logo redesign. I'd spent one excruciating meeting in his glass tower headquarters, watching him respond to emails while I presented my concepts. He'd approved my design with a distracted nod, and I'd never expected to hear from him again. "Mr. Blackthorne requests your presence at his private office. Today. 6 o'clock sharp. The matter is time-sensitive and concerns a unique business proposition." I don't understand. "He'll explain everything. A car will collect you at 5:30. I suggest business casual attire." The line went dead before I could explain that my business casual wardrobe consisted of one blazer with a suspicious stain and jeans that had given up on life around the same time I did. I stared at my phone, then at the eviction notice, then at the photograph of my mother stuck to my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the Brooklyn Bridge. In the picture, she was laughing. This was before cancer had carved 20 pounds off her frame and introduced her to the particular hell of chemotherapy. Before I'd learned that love, no matter how fierce, couldn't negotiate with hospital administrators. What did I have to lose? My dignity had already filed for bankruptcy. The car that arrived at 5:30 was the kind of black luxury sedan that probably had a higher net worth than me. The driver, a silent man who looked like he moonlighted as a Secret Service agent, navigated Manhattan traffic with the calm efficiency of someone who knew that money could solve most problems, including gridlock. Blackthorne Tower pierced the New York skyline like a glass middle finger to everyone who'd ever struggled. 68 floors of architectural arrogance, crowned with Adrian Blackthorne's personal domain, the entire top floor naturally, because why settle for mere penthouses when you could have a sky kingdom? Genevieve met me in the lobby, a woman in her 50s with silver hair styled into aggressive elegance and an expression suggesting she'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed either time. She escorted me past security that could have guarded nuclear launch codes, into a private elevator that probably cost more than most people's homes, up to the 68th floor where gods played chess with human lives. The elevator doors opened onto a space that defied my every expectation. I'd braced myself for cold minimalism, all chrome and glass and surfaces you couldn't touch without leaving peasant fingerprints. Instead, I found something almost human. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a painting that changed by the hour. Real books lined custom shelves. Art that looked original, decorated walls the color of expensive bourbon. Leather furniture that had probably been handcrafted by Italian monks who'd taken vows of perfectionism. And standing by those impossible windows, backlit by the city he'd conquered, was Adrian Blackthorne himself. I'd seen his photographs, Forbes covers, TechCrunch articles, that infamous Vanity Fair profile titled The Billionaire Who Doesn't Sleep. But photographs couldn't capture the sheer presence of him. 6'3" of tailored perfection wrapped in a charcoal suit that probably had a trust fund. Dark hair styled with the casual precision of someone who paid attention to details. A face that belonged on Roman coins, all sharp angles and aristocratic bone structure, the kind of handsome that seemed specifically designed to make poor decisions feel justified. But his eyes. God, his eyes. Storm gray and calculating, they looked at me the way a scientist might examine a particularly interesting specimen. Not cruel, exactly. Just assessing, measuring, determining value with the cold efficiency of someone who'd learned that everything, had a price. Miss Chun. His voice matched his assistant's in terms of refinement, but where Genevieve's accent suggested inherited British estates, Adrian's had been acquired, polished American English with edges sharp enough to draw blood. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Mr. Blackthorne. I hated that my voice wavered. Your assistant said this was about a business proposition? Please sit. He gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk, a slab of dark wood that looked like it had been carved from a tree that died of natural causes sometime during the Renaissance. Can Genevieve bring you anything? Water? Coffee? Something stronger? Answers would be nice. That earned me a reaction, the slight lift of one eyebrow, a microscopic adjustment that suggested I'd surprised him. Good. I'd spent too much of my life being underestimated. He sat across from me, steepling his fingers in that universal gesture of powerful men about to ruin your life with impeccable manners. I'll be direct. I've been following your work since the logo project. You're talented. Creative. More importantly, you're in a difficult financial situation that makes you suitable for what I'm about to propose. My stomach dropped. You investigated me? I investigate everyone who enters my professional orbit. Your mother's stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The experimental treatment at Sloan Kettering. Your medical debt. Student loans. The eviction notice you received this morning. He recited my personal disasters like he was reading a shopping list. You've sold everything of value. Maxed out 3 credit cards. Your freelance income barely covers basic expenses. In approximately 48 hours, the hospital will halt your mother's treatment due to non-payment. Each word landed like a physical blow. I wanted to be outraged, to storm out with my dignity intact, but dignity doesn't pay for cancer treatment. Pride doesn't keep your mother alive. What do you want? My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. Adrian leaned back, his expression unreadable. I need a wife. Temporarily. 6 months, potentially 7. In exchange, I'll pay you $300,000. The number hit me like ice water. 300,000. Enough to pay every medical bill. Enough to keep my apartment. Enough to breathe for the first time in 18 months. I don't understand, I managed. You could marry anyone. Supermodels. Actresses. People whose last names are also luxury brands. I don't want anyone. I want a transaction. He slid a document across his desk, thick, expensive paper covered in dense legal text. My grandfather, Edmund Blackthorne, is dying. Terminal illness, 6 months at most. His will stipulates that I must be married to inherit full control of Blackthorne Enterprises. He's from a different generation, believes marriage equals stability, maturity, commitment to legacy. So marry someone for real. I don't do relationships, Miss Chun. He said it like he was explaining basic mathematics to a child. They're time-consuming, emotionally volatile, and the return on investment is abysmal. Romance is a chemical reaction that people mistake for destiny. I need someone intelligent enough to maintain a convincing performance, desperate enough to honor the terms, and practical enough to walk away when it's finished. The clinical assessment should have insulted me. Instead, I found myself almost admiring the brutal honesty. At least he wasn't pretending this was something it wasn't. What's the catch? Because there was always a catch. Always. Adrian's expression shifted, something darker crossing his features. One non-negotiable condition. You can never, under any circumstances, fall in love with me. The moment you develop genuine romantic feelings, the contract terminates immediately and you receive nothing. No partial payment. No severance. Nothing. I blinked. You're joking. I never joke about contracts. He pulled out another document, a psychological profile with my name at the top. I've seen it happen before. Proximity breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds affection. People start confusing convenience for connection, shared space for shared souls. I won't be responsible for your emotional damage when this arrangement ends. The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. As if his personality wasn't the emotional equivalent of a restraining order. As if anyone could possibly confuse his glacial demeanor for warmth. Has anyone ever told you, I said slowly, that you have the emotional capacity of a tax return? Frequently. usually by people who want something I'm not willing to provide. He leaned forward. I'm offering you a solution, Miss Chun. A clean, transactional solution to your very real problems. Your mother lives. Your debts disappear. You walk away with enough money to rebuild your life. All you have to do is pretend to love me for 6 months, while keeping your actual heart completely uninvolved. I looked at the contract, then at the man who thought he could purchase 6 months of human connection like it was a software subscription. $300,000. My mother's face in that refrigerator photograph, laughing like cancer, was still just a word, not a death sentence. How do I know you'll actually pay? He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and showed me the screen, a bank transfer authorization form with my name and an amount that made my vision blur. The full sum will be held in escrow, released upon successful completion of the 6-month period. Additionally, I'll pay all your mother's current medical bills immediately upon signing. Consider it a signing bonus. Why me? The question escaped before I could stop it. Seriously. You could hire an actress. Someone trained to fake emotions. Because actresses make the fatal mistake of believing their own performances. You, Miss Chun, are an artist who understands that creation doesn't require belief. You can paint a masterpiece without claiming its reality. Besides, his gray eyes met mine with unsettling intensity. You're genuine enough to convince my grandfather while being practical enough to remember this is business. You have something most people in my world lack, authentic desperation paired with intelligent self-awareness. It should have been insulting. Instead, it felt like being seen, really seen, for the first time in months. I picked up the pen. $300,000 to pretend for 6 months. What could possibly go wrong? Drop your predictions. Be honest. What's the craziest thing you do to save someone you love? Drop it in the comments. The contract was 37 pages of legal language that basically boiled down to, pretend to be madly in love with Adrian Blackthorne, don't actually fall in love with Adrian Blackthorne, and remember that breaching the terms would result in financial devastation that would make my current situation look like a luxury vacation. I signed it in Adrian's office while Genevieve witnessed with the detached efficiency of someone who'd seen Stranger Things by Tuesday. The moment my signature dried, Adrian made a phone call that resulted in my mother's medical bills being paid in full within the hour. Watching those numbers zero out on the hospital's payment portal felt like watching a magic trick performed by capitalism. We start tomorrow, Adrian informed me, already moving to his next task. I've arranged for you to move into the penthouse. Separate bedrooms, obviously, but we need to establish cohabitation for authenticity. Your penthouse. My voice cracked. I thought this was just public appearances. My grandfather isn't an idiot. He'll want proof we're building a life together. Adrian's tone suggested this was as obvious as gravity. Genevieve will handle the logistics. A stylist will arrive at 8 a.m. to prepare your wardrobe. We're having dinner with Edmund tomorrow night, your first test. The next 12 hours passed in a fever dream. Professional movers packed my pathetic belongings while I stared at my studio apartment like I was attending my own funeral. By midnight, I was standing in Adrian's penthouse, a space so absurdly luxurious it felt like a movie set. The guest bedroom alone was larger than my entire former apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A bathroom with a soaking tub that could have doubled as a small pool. A walk-in closet currently empty but with enough space to house a family of 4. Genevieve had left a welcome packet on the bed, building access codes, staff schedules, and a detailed itinerary for my new life as Adrian Blackthorne's temporary wife. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window watching Manhattan glitter below, wondering what kind of person signs away 6 months of their life for money. Wondering if my mother would be proud or horrified. Wondering if Adrian was right, if I was practical enough to keep my heart completely uninvolved. The stylist arrived at exactly 8 a.m., accompanied by 3 assistants and enough clothing to stock a boutique. Her name was Martine, a French woman in her 60s who looked at me the way a sculptor might examine raw marble, seeing potential where others saw poverty. We work with what we have, she announced, circling me critically. You have good bone structure. Terrible posture, we fix this. Hair needs professional color correction. Skin is acceptable but requires better products. By the time I finish, you will look like you belong at Adrian's side. The transformation took 6 hours. Hair color adjusted from box dye brown to rich chestnut with caramel highlights. Professional makeup application that somehow made my face look like a better version of itself. A wardrobe consultation that resulted in $12,000 worth of designer clothing being delivered to my new closet. Remember, Martine said as she left, you are not pretending to be wealthy. You are simply being yourself in better packaging. Confidence, Sherry. Wealthy people don't apologize for existing. Adrian returned at 7, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled Billionaires Who Actually Bathe. He stopped when he saw me, his expression flickering with something I couldn't quite identify. You look presentable, he said finally. Which, coming from Adrian, probably counted as a standing ovation. You really know how to make a girl feel special. I hired you for authenticity, not flattery. He checked his watch. We're meeting Edmund at Oriole. Reservation at 8. In the car, I'll brief you on what you need to know. The car ride downtown was a crash course in Edmund Blackthorne. 79 years old. Self-made billionaire who'd built Blackthorne Enterprises from a single software patent. Widowed 15 years. Sharp as broken glass despite the cancer ravaging his body. Suspicious of everyone, especially women who approached his grandson with dollar signs in their eyes. He'll test you, Adrian warned as we pulled up to the restaurant. He'll try to catch inconsistencies in our story. Don't oversell the romance. He'll smell desperation. Be yourself, but a version of yourself that could plausibly find me tolerable. That's asking a lot. His mouth twitched. Welcome to the challenge. Oriole was the kind of restaurant where they don't list prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford the breadbasket. We were escorted to a private room where Edmund Blackthorne waited, a man who'd clearly been imposing before cancer had decided to redecorate his body. He sat in a wheelchair, oxygen tank beside him, but his eyes were laser-focused and terrifyingly intelligent. So, he rasped, looking me up and down with frank assessment, you're the woman who finally cracked my grandson's ice fortress. I felt Adrian tense beside me. This was it, my first performance. I could play meek and boring, or I could take a risk. Actually, I said, settling into my chair, I'm the woman who's been hired to pretend your grandson has human emotions. The jury's still out on whether he actually does. The silence that followed felt geological. Then Edmund laughed, a wheezing genuine laugh that turned into a coughing fit requiring intervention from his nurse. I like her, he announced when he could breathe again. She's got spine. Unlike that last one. What was her name? Brittany? No, Tiffany. God, she agreed with everything you said, Adrian. Like dating a motivational poster with perfect teeth. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ravenna's certainly opinionated. It's called having a personality, I said sweetly. I know it's foreign territory for you. Edmund wheezed another laugh. Tell me, dear, what possessed you to accept a proposal from this emotionally constipated workaholic? The question hung in the air like a trap. I could feel Adrian watching me, wondering how I'd navigate this. Honestly. I met Edmund's eyes. Have you seen him? I'm incredibly shallow. It's entirely about the bone structure. I reached over and patted Adrian's cheek like he was an expensive show dog. Plus, he promised to learn feelings. We're starting with mild annoyance and working our way up to basic human empathy by month 6. Edmund's delight was palpable. Even Adrian's lips twitched into something almost resembling amusement. The dinner progressed with surprising ease. Edmund told stories about building his empire from nothing, tales of early computing, of risky investments that paid off, of competitors who'd underestimated him. He spoke about his late wife Helena, with such tenderness that it made my chest ache. She kept me human, Edmund said quietly. Success makes you forget you're mortal. Helena reminded me every day. His gaze shifted to Adrian. That's why I added the marriage clause, you know. Not because I don't trust your business acumen. Because I don't trust you to remember you're human without someone to reflect it back. Something passed across Adrian's face, too quick to identify but gone just as fast. Love is a chemical reaction, Adrian said flatly. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. The brain's way of encouraging reproduction. Is that what you think? Edmund looked at me. And you? What's your professional opinion on love? I thought about my mother. About the eviction notice. About the 37-page contract currently governing my life. I think love is expensive, I said honestly. And I think people who can afford to be cynical about it have never had to choose between romance and survival. The silence that followed was different, heavier. Edmund studied me with new intensity, while Adrian looked like I'd revealed something he hadn't anticipated. Well, Edmund said finally, at least one of you is honest. The dinner ended with Edmund extracting promises of weekly visits and a warning that he'd be monitoring the situation closely. In the car ride home, Adrian was uncharacteristically quiet. You did well, he said finally. Better than expected. You sound surprised. I am. Most people either try too hard or not hard enough. You found the middle ground, authentic enough to be believable, performative enough to maintain the illusion. Is that a compliment? I can't tell with you. He turned to look at me, those gray eyes unreadable in the passing streetlights. Edmund liked you. That's what matters. Back at the penthouse, I retreated to my borrowed bedroom and finally called my mother. She was at her sister's place, my Aunt Margaret's brownstone in Queens where she'd been staying during treatment. Ravenna. The hospital called. They said my bills were paid. All of them. How did you? I got a client, I interrupted, hating the lie even as it left my mouth. A huge corporate project. 6-month contract with a massive advance. Everything's going to be okay, Mom. The relief in her voice made my chest constrict. We talked for an hour, about her test results improving, about Aunt Margaret's cooking catastrophic, about everything except the fact that I'd sold 6 months of my life to a man who viewed human connection as a negotiable commodity. After we hung up, I stood by my window overlooking Central Park and allowed myself one moment of total honesty. I had no idea who I was anymore. The girl who'd moved to New York with design school dreams felt like someone from a previous life. In her place was this new person, someone who could lie to her mother's face, who could perform affection for a stranger, who could sign contracts that turned love into a breach of terms. A knock interrupted my existential crisis. Adrian stood in the doorway, now in casual clothes, black t-shirt and dark jeans that somehow made him look more intimidating than his business suits. "I forgot to mention," he said, "we have a couples therapy session tomorrow." "Excuse me?" "Not real therapy. Dr. Yolanda Mendoza, she's a consultant who specializes in teaching couples how to appear authentic for public consumption. Politicians use her. Celebrities. People who need to convince the world they're in love when they're absolutely not. That's the most dystopian thing I've ever heard. Welcome to my world." He turned to leave, then paused. "Ravenna? What you said to Edmund about love being expensive. Did you mean that?" I considered lying. Considered giving him the answer that would keep our transaction clean and uncomplicated. Instead, I told the truth. Every word. He nodded slowly, something shifting behind his expression. "Good. As long as you remember, this is business. Nothing more." "Trust me," I said, watching him walk away, "that's not something I'm likely to forget." But alone in my borrowed bedroom, staring at my reflection in windows that overlooked a city I no longer recognized, I wondered if I was lying to both of us. They're learning to act in love, but what if it becomes real? Comment what you think happens next. Dr. Yolanda Mendoza operated out of an office in Tribeca that looked less like a therapy space and more like a minimalist art installation. White walls. Uncomfortable modern furniture clearly designed by someone who hated the human spine. A single orchid that probably cost more than my former monthly rent. Dr. Mendoza herself was 60-something with silver hair cut into a severe bob and the kind of sharp-eyed intensity that suggested she could spot a lie from 3 blocks away. She sat across from Adrian and me with a leather-bound notebook, studying us like we were a particularly uninspiring science project. "Let me be direct," she said, her accent placing her somewhere in Eastern Europe via years of expensive education. "You two have the chemistry of a corporate merger. Functional but utterly lifeless. If you think you're going to convince anyone you're in love, you're delusional." Adrian looked unbothered. I wanted to melt into the uncomfortable chair. "That's why we're here," Adrian said calmly. "To learn the performance." "No." Dr. Mendoza's tone could have cut glass. "You're here to understand that love, even fake love, requires vulnerability. Right now, you sit like strangers on a subway train. Careful not to touch. Careful not to reveal anything real." She turned to me. "You, Ravenna. When did you last make genuine eye contact with him?" I blinked. We talk all the time." Talking at someone is not the same as seeing them. Try now. Look at him. Really look. I turned to face Adrian, suddenly aware of how deliberately we'd been avoiding this. His gray eyes met mine and I felt something electric run through the space between us. Up close, I could see details I'd missed. A small scar above his left eyebrow, slight shadows under his eyes suggesting he slept as poorly as I did, the way his jaw tightened when he was uncomfortable. "Good," Dr. Mendoza said. "Now hold hands." Adrian extended his hand like he was offering to shake on a business deal. I took it, and his skin was surprisingly warm. I'd half expected him to be room temperature. "Terrible," Dr. Mendoza announced. "You're holding hands like you're afraid she has a contagious disease." "She might," Adrian said. "I haven't seen her medical records." I yanked my hand back. "You're impossible." And yet here we are. Dr. Mendoza made a note that looked suspiciously like she was drawing a frowning face. "This is going to be more difficult than I anticipated. We're going to start with basics. Ravenna, tell Adrian something true. Something you would only share with someone you trust." My mind went blank. What could I possibly share that wouldn't make this more complicated than it already was? "I'm scared," I said finally. "Every day. I wake up scared that my mother's treatment will stop working. Scared that I'm not good enough at anything to actually make it. Scared that I'll look back at my life and realize I spent all of it just trying to survive." The words hung in the space between us. Adrian's expression shifted, something almost like recognition crossing his features. "I'm scared too," he said quietly. And from the look on his face, the admission surprised him as much as it surprised me. That everything I've built is just an elaborate distraction from the fact that I don't actually know how to be a person. That my grandfather is right, that I've become so obsessed with control that I've forgotten what it means to simply exist. Dr. Mendoza looked genuinely surprised. "Well, that was unexpected. Perhaps there's hope for you after all." The session continued for 2 more hours. We learned how to touch casually, a hand on the lower back, fingers brushing when reaching for the same object, the specific angle of leaning toward each other that suggested intimacy without screaming performance. Dr. Mendoza taught us to read each other's micro-expressions, to respond to unspoken cues, to build the kind of unconscious synchronization that real couples developed over time. "Homework," she announced as we were leaving. "Spend 2 hours together daily doing something that's not work-related. Cook together. Watch a movie. Argue about something meaningless. Build shared experiences. They're the foundation of believable intimacy. In the car ride back, Adrian seemed lost in thought. That thing you said, I ventured. About not knowing how to be a person. Did you mean it? He was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. My father died when I was 12. Car accident. After that, my mother checked out emotionally, present but absent, if that makes sense. Edmund threw himself into work. I learned early that feelings were liabilities. That successful people don't waste time on emotional management, they outsource it or eliminate it entirely. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Is it? Or is it just efficient? He looked at me. You said you're scared. But fear is just your nervous system trying to protect you from threats that may not exist. It's neurochemistry, Ravenna. Nothing more. Do you actually believe that? Or is that just easier than admitting you feel things? His jaw tightened. Careful. That sounds dangerously close to psychoanalysis. Heaven forbid someone suggests you're human. But something had shifted between us. The admission in Dr. Mendoza's office had cracked something open, not much, but enough to let a sliver of light through. The homework turned out to be more complicated than I'd anticipated. Adrian's idea of spending time together involved working in companionable silence, him on his laptop reviewing quarterly reports while I sketched design concepts on my tablet. Not exactly the bonding experience Dr. Mendoza had probably intended, but it was strangely comfortable. The third night, I made dinner. Nothing fancy, pasta carbonara, which was basically the extent of my culinary expertise. Adrian emerged from his home office, looking vaguely suspicious. You cooked. Don't sound so shocked. I have skills beyond graphic design and pretending to find you tolerable. I gestured to the table where I'd set out plates, wine, even folded the napkins into something that wasn't a crumpled disaster. Besides, Dr. Mendoza said we needed shared experiences. This counts. He sat, looking at the food like it might explode. I usually eat at my desk. Well, tonight you're eating like a human being. Revolutionary concept, I know. The first bite seemed to surprise him. This is actually good. Again with the shock. I'm beginning to develop a complex. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Tell me something. If you weren't doing this, he gestured between us, what would you want to be doing? With your life, your career. If money wasn't an issue. The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I used to dream about opening my own design studio. Small, independent, working with artists and non-profits on meaningful projects instead of just corporate logo redesigns. But that was before reality taught me that dreams are expensive and health insurance is mandatory. That's not an answer. That's resignation disguised as pragmatism. Says the man who built an empire on pragmatism. Exactly. Which is why I recognize the difference. He refilled my wine glass. You're talented, Ravenna. I've seen your portfolio. The work you do when you're not constrained by client demands is exceptional. There's a reason I chose you for this arrangement, beyond desperation, I mean. Wow. A compliment and an insult. You're really pulling out all the stops tonight. I'm serious. After this is over, after you have the money, don't waste it on just surviving. Build something. The sincerity in his voice was unexpected. For a moment, I saw past the cold calculation to something that might have been genuine encouragement. What about you? I asked. If you weren't running Blackthorn Enterprises, what would you do? He considered the question with unusual gravity. I have no idea. I've been groomed for this role since I could walk. Edmund started teaching me about quarterly projections before I learned to ride a bike. The company isn't just what I do, it's who I am. Without it. He trailed off, looking genuinely uncertain for the first time since I'd met him. That's terrifying. Is it? Or is it focused? Adrian, you just described having no identity outside of your job. That's not focus. That's erasure. He set down his fork with deliberate precision. Careful, Ravenna. This is starting to sound like actual conversation. We wouldn't want to accidentally develop rapport. God forbid we accidentally become people who can tolerate each other. But there was no real bite to the exchange. Something was happening between us, something neither of us had anticipated. We were beginning to see past the transaction to the actual humans trapped inside this arrangement. The weeks blurred together. Weekly dinners with Edmund, who continued to test us with increasingly creative questions about our relationship. Charity galas where we performed our choreographed affection for New York's elite. Morning coffees where Adrian started remembering how I took my espresso, 3 shots, 1 sugar, dash of cinnamon. Evening conversations that stretched longer than necessary, covering everything from politics to philosophy to whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Adrian, absolutely not. Me, you're wrong and I can prove it. We developed routines. Inside jokes. The kind of comfortable shorthand that came from proximity and shared experience. Adrian started smiling more, real smiles, not the calculated corporate expression he used for board meetings. I found myself looking forward to our evenings together, to the way he'd emerge from his office exactly at 7, tie loosened, looking almost human. Dr. Mendoza noticed the change immediately at our 4th session. Better, she announced, watching us sit together naturally, Adrian's hand resting casually on the back of my chair. Much better. You're beginning to read each other's rhythms. The performance is becoming instinctive. We've been practicing, I said. No, Dr. Mendoza corrected. You've been living together. There's a difference. The body remembers patterns even when the mind insists its performance. After she left, Adrian was quiet. What's wrong? I asked. Nothing. Just thinking about what she said. About the body remembering patterns. And he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Nothing. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. We both felt it, the slow, dangerous shift from performance to something that felt suspiciously like reality. The way his hand on my back at galas started to feel less like choreography and more like instinct. The way I caught myself smiling at his terrible jokes. The way we'd started texting throughout the day, meaningless updates about nothing important, the kind of communication that served no purpose except connection. One night, 3 months into our arrangement, I woke up at 2 a.m. to find Adrian sitting in the living room, staring out at the city with an expression of such profound isolation that my chest ached. Can't sleep? I asked, settling onto the couch beside him. Insomnia. I've had it since I was a teenager. Usually I work through it, but tonight. He trailed off. Talk to me. About anything. What's keeping you up? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Edmund's getting worse. The doctors say maybe 2 months. Maybe less. And I keep thinking about what happens after. When the performance ends and you leave and I'm alone in this apartment with nothing but quarterly projections and the crushing awareness that I've spent my entire adult life optimizing for success while systematically eliminating every element that makes life worth living. The raw honesty stopped my breath. Adrian. Don't try to fix it or tell me it'll be okay. I don't want platitudes. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who won't try to solve it like it's a business problem. So I didn't offer solutions. I just sat with him in the dark, our shoulders touching, watching the city blur through glass, and realized with absolute certainty that I was in serious trouble. Because somewhere between the contract signing and this moment, I'd stopped performing. And the clause I'd agreed to, the one that said I could never fall in love with Adrian Blackthorne, was becoming the most expensive mistake of my life. The contract says don't fall in love, she's about to break it. What would you do in her position? Month 4 arrived with the subtlety of an oncoming train. Edmund's health deteriorated rapidly. Emergency hospitalizations, experimental treatments that bought days instead of weeks, whispered conversations between doctors who'd stopped pretending hope was a medical option. Adrian withdrew into himself, working 18-hour days, responding to my attempts at connection with monosyllabic efficiency. I understood. Grief made people do strange things, and Adrian's grief was complicated by the fact that he'd never learned the language of emotions. He was trying to solve his grandfather's death like it was a quarterly shortfall. If he just worked hard enough, analyzed the data thoroughly enough, maybe he could negotiate a different outcome. It didn't help that Blackthorne Enterprises board had started circling like sharks who detected blood in the water. Adrian was in meetings constantly, fighting hostile takeover attempts, managing stockholder panic, trying to prove he was capable of leading without Edmund's steady hand on the tiller. And I was falling apart in ways I hadn't anticipated. Because despite every warning, despite the contract clause literally designed to prevent this, I'd gone and done the stupidest thing possible. I'd fallen in love with Adrian Blackthorne. Not the billionaire version. Not the cold, calculating tech mogul who appeared on magazine covers. I'd fallen for the man who couldn't sleep at 3 a.m., who'd admitted he didn't know how to be a person, who'd started leaving sticky notes on my design tablet with terrible jokes clearly found by Googling humor for normal humans. The man who'd held my hand during my mother's recent health scare, who'd called his personal physician at midnight to consult about her treatment, who'd never once made me feel like my problems were too small to matter. I was contractually obligated not to feel this way, which made the feeling approximately 10,000 times worse. Dr. Mendoza noticed immediately at our next session. You're in love with him, she said flatly the moment Adrian stepped out to take an urgent call. Don't bother denying it. I've been doing this for 30 years. I can spot authentic feeling from 3 continents away. It's not Ravenna. I'm not judging. I'm warning. Men like Adrian don't know how to receive love. They know transactions. They know exchanges. But actual love. She shook her head. It terrifies them because it's the one thing they can't control. And when people like Adrian are terrified, they destroy the thing that scares them. He's not like that. Isn't he? He built this entire arrangement specifically to avoid emotional complications. You think he'll suddenly embrace them just because you've developed feelings he explicitly told you not to develop. The truth of it made my stomach turn. But I couldn't stop myself. I was the Titanic and Adrian was the iceberg and I was sailing straight toward disaster with my eyes wide open. The crisis came on a Tuesday. I arrived at Adrian's office downtown for our scheduled couples lunch, a public appearance designed to maintain our facade for business associates. His assistant waved me through with an odd expression, something between pity and warning that I didn't register until too late. I opened the door to find Adrian kissing another woman. Not a casual kiss. Not a professional greeting gone wrong. A real kiss, his hands in her dark hair, her body pressed against his desk, the kind of intimacy that made the air leave my lungs in a rush. They broke apart when the door closed behind me. The woman turned, and I saw she was breathtaking, the kind of beautiful that belonged on runways and magazine covers, wearing a power suit that probably cost more than my entire former annual salary. "Oh," she said, her voice honey over razor blades. "You must be the temporary wife. How delightful. Adrian's told me so much about your little arrangement." The world tilted sideways. Adrian looked pale, his carefully controlled expression cracking around the edges. "Ravenna." "I'm Isadora Valentine," the woman continued, her smile sharpening. "Adrian's actual fiancé. Did he forget to mention me?" The words hit like physical blows. Fiancé. Actual. As in real. As in I was the placeholder, the temporary inconvenience, the hired help. "We've been engaged for 2 years, Isadora explained with obvious relish, perching on Adrian's desk like she owned it. "Planning to marry after Edmund's death, naturally. But then that pesky will showed up with its marriage requirement. Edmund hates me, you see, some tedious family drama about me being beneath the Blackthorn legacy. So we needed someone temporary. Someone desperate enough to play along and practical enough to disappear afterward without making a fuss." I looked at Adrian, waiting for the denial. Waiting for him to tell me this was some elaborate misunderstanding. But his silence was confirmation enough. "The condition in the contract," I whispered. "The clause about not falling in love. You weren't protecting me from emotional damage. You were protecting yourself, making sure I'd leave cleanly when Isadora came back into the picture. Ravenna, it's more complicated." "No." I yanked off the engagement ring, 2 carats of lies and performance. "It's actually very simple. You're exactly what I thought you were the day we met. A man who sees people as assets to be managed. Resources to be deployed. Temporary solutions to permanent problems. That's not fair." "Fair." The laugh that escaped me was broken glass. "You hired me to pretend to love you while you were engaged to someone else. You made me sign a contract saying I could never develop real feelings, not to protect me, but to protect your neat little plan. How is any of this fair?" Isadora was watching our exchange with undisguised glee. "Oh, this is delicious. Adrian, you didn't mention she had actual feelings. That must complicate your timeline." "Shut up, Isadora." Adrian's voice was sharp enough to draw blood, but his eyes never left mine. "Ravenna, please. Let me explain." "Explain what? That you're a liar? That this entire arrangement was even more calculated than I thought? That I was stupid enough to fall for?" I stopped myself, but too late. The admission hung in the air between us. Adrian's expression shifted, something that looked almost like pain crossing his features. "You weren't supposed to." "I know." The words came out raw. "I know I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you. It's right there in Section 12, Subsection 4. The contractor shall not develop genuine romantic attachment to the client under penalty of immediate contract termination and forfeiture of all compensation." I'd memorized the damn clause. Of course I had. "Congratulations, Adrian. You win. I'm in breach. Contract terminated. I get nothing." "Ravenna." But I was already leaving, pushing past Isadora's smug expression, past Adrian's assistant who definitely knew what was happening, into an elevator that couldn't descend fast enough. I made it to the street before the tears came, great gasping sobs that made pedestrians give me wide berth. 4 months. I'd lasted 4 months before destroying everything. My mother's continued treatment, funded by Adrian's ongoing payments, would end immediately. The money in escrow would never materialize. I'd sacrificed my integrity, my honesty, my sense of self for nothing. Worse than nothing. Because now I had to live with the knowledge that I'd fallen in love with a man who'd explicitly designed our entire relationship to prevent that exact outcome. I went back to the penthouse, still technically my residence for another 2 weeks according to the lease Adrian had signed. I needed to pack to disappear, to figure out how to explain to my mother that her treatment would be stopping because her daughter was an idiot who'd confused performance for reality. I was shoving clothes into a suitcase when Adrian appeared in my doorway. "Get out," I said without looking at him. "No." He stepped into the room. "Not until you let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You hired me for a job. I failed to maintain professional boundaries. End of story." Isadora lied. That made me look up. "What?" She lied. "We were engaged, past tense. I ended it 3 weeks ago." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its careful styling. "She showed up at the office yesterday demanding I dump you and marry her immediately. I told her we were done. That's when she decided to blow up our arrangement." "Why should I believe you?" "Because Edmund will confirm it. Because my attorney has the termination documents. Because," he stopped, seeming to struggle with something. Because I'm in love with you, and I have absolutely no idea what to do about it. The words hung in the air like impossible things. Like unicorns. Like honest billionaires. You're lying. I don't lie about my feelings. Mostly because I've spent 34 years pretending I don't have any. He moved closer. But you were right, that night when I couldn't sleep. I've eliminated every element that makes life worth living in pursuit of success. And then you showed up, stubborn and brilliant and calling me emotionally constipated to my face, and suddenly I couldn't remember why I thought feelings were liabilities instead of the entire point. Adrian, I can't, my voice broke. The contract says if I fall in love with you, I get nothing. My mother's treatment. Screw the contract. He pulled out his phone, pulled up his banking app, showed me a screen I couldn't quite process. I transferred the full amount to your account this morning. Before the office disaster. Before you found out about Isadora. The money is yours regardless of what happens next. I stared at the number. $300,000. Just sitting there. Mine. Why would you do that? Because somewhere between teaching me to fold napkins and sitting with me in the dark at 3 a.m., you made me want to be a person who deserves love instead of a machine that generates quarterly returns. Because you're the first person in my adult life who saw past the net worth to the terrified human underneath. Because I'm in love with you, and that's more important than any contract. The clause was meant to protect me from exactly this. From feeling something real and not knowing how to handle it. From caring about someone so much that losing them feels like losing gravity. He was close enough now that I could see the fear in his eyes. I'm terrified, Ravenna. Absolutely terrified. I don't know how to be someone's partner. I don't know how to build a relationship that isn't governed by terms and conditions. But I want to learn. With you. If you'll let me. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly it felt like a physical ache. How do I know this isn't just another performance? Another transaction dressed up as emotion? You don't. That's what makes it love instead of business. The risk. The possibility that I'm telling the truth but you'll never fully believe me. The chance that we'll try this and fail because I'm too damaged to be what you need. He reached for my hand, and this time there was nothing careful or choreographed about it. But I'm asking anyway. No contract. No conditions. Just two terrified people who accidentally found something real inside a fake arrangement. The smart move would have been to walk away. To take the money, save my mother, and forget Adrian Blackthorne existed. To protect myself from further damage. But I'd never been particularly good at smart moves. If we do this, I said slowly, it's not a performance. Not anymore. You don't get to hide behind transactions when things get difficult. You have to actually try, to be present, to be honest, to be human. I don't know how. Then you'll learn. We'll learn together. That sounds terrifying. Welcome to love. It's supposed to be. He kissed me then, not the staged kisses we performed for cameras and galas, but something real. Something that felt like falling and flying simultaneously. Something that made every contract clause and calculated risk worth it. When we broke apart, he pressed his forehead to mine. I'm going to be terrible at this. Probably. I'll work too much and forget important dates and struggle to express feelings like a normal person. Almost certainly. But I'll try. That's all I can promise, I'll try. That's all I'm asking. We stood there in my borrowed bedroom that I wouldn't have to leave now, holding each other like we could anchor each other to something solid in a world that kept shifting. Outside, Manhattan glittered with possibility. Inside, two people who'd spent months pretending were finally terrifyingly trying something real. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was messier than that. More complicated. More human. It was exactly what we both needed. Adrian had a FINC the whole time. Are you Team Ravenna, or do you think Adrian deserves a chance to explain? Edmund Blackthorne died on a Thursday in late September, surrounded by the people who'd loved him, his medical team, his oldest friend Marcus who'd been his business partner 50 years ago, and us, Adrian and me, holding hands beside his hospital bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. Which, terrifyingly, it had become. The weeks since the Isadora disaster had been a strange education in what actual relationships required. Turns out, when you remove the contract and choreography, intimacy becomes infinitely more complicated. Adrian struggled with vulnerability the way some people struggle with sobriety. Daily effort, constant vigilance, the occasional spectacular failure that required apologies and repair. But he tried. God, he tried. He started therapy, actual therapy, not the performance coaching from Dr. Mendoza. He began setting boundaries at work, leaving the office at reasonable hours, learning that the company wouldn't spontaneously combust if he wasn't available 24/7. He asked questions about my day and actually listened to the answers. He met my mother, who immediately saw through his carefully constructed charm to the nervous wreck underneath and announced she liked him anyway. He's damaged, she told me after that first awkward dinner, but he's trying to be less damaged. That's all anyone can ask. I moved permanently into the penthouse, not as hired help but as Adrian's actual partner, which meant negotiating everything from closet space to whose turn it was to make coffee. We argued about stupid things like thermostat settings and whether it was acceptable to eat cereal for dinner. We learned each other's rhythms, our damage patterns, the specific ways we each self-sabotaged when things got too good. It was messy and imperfect, and absolutely nothing like the performance we'd staged for Edmund and the world. It was real. Edmund knew. Of course he knew. The man hadn't built an empire by being oblivious to human nature. "You're actually in love," he'd said during one of our last visits, his voice already weak from the cancer that was systematically shutting down his organs. "I can tell because you argue like people who care about each other instead of performing affection like bad actors in a worse play." Adrian had tensed beside me. "Grandfather. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this started as anything but a business arrangement. You think I didn't notice the contract clause? The careful staging? I'm dying, not stupid." But his expression was fond. "The question was whether you'd both be brave enough to let it become real. Apparently you were." "I'm sorry we lied," I said quietly. "Are you?" "Because the lie led to the truth. Sometimes that's how it works. We put on costumes to survive, and then forget we're wearing them until someone reminds us of our actual face underneath." He looked at Adrian with such profound love it made my chest ache. "Your grandmother and I started as a business arrangement too. Arranged marriage between families. We hated each other for the first year. But somewhere in the performance, we found something worth keeping." "I didn't know that," Adrian said, surprise evident in his voice. "Because I never told you. I wanted you to think love was this mystical thing that happened by accident. But sometimes the best things in life require intention. Choice. The decision to transform obligation into devotion." Edmund's hand found Adrian's. "I'm proud of you. Not for the empire. For this, for choosing to be human instead of just successful." Now, 3 weeks later, we stood in Edmund's attorney's office for the reading of the will. The room was full, board members, distant relatives who'd suddenly remembered they were family, Isadora, who'd somehow finagled an invitation and sat in the back looking like she was attending a particularly boring gallery opening. Marcus Chun, Edmund's attorney of 40 years, looked appropriately solemn as he opened the document. "Edmund Blackthorne's last will and testament is unusual," he began, "in that it was modified multiple times in the months before his death. The most recent version, dated 1 week ago, supersedes all previous versions." Adrian's hand tightened in mine. We'd expected this. The marriage requirement, the inheritance conditions, the corporate succession plan Edmund had spent months perfecting. Marcus cleared his throat. "To my grandson, Adrian Blackthorne, I leave controlling interest in Blackthorne Enterprises, all properties held in the family trust, and the bulk of my liquid assets, with the following conditions." Here it came. The stipulations. The requirements. The chess moves from beyond the grave. Adrian must remain married for a minimum of 5 years. Divorce before that time results in immediate transfer of control to the Blackthorne Foundation. Additionally, Marcus paused, something that might have been amusement crossing his face. Adrian and Ravenna must have at least one child together, biological or adopted, within 7 years. Edmund's words were, and I quote, "I want great-grandchildren to spoil, and I want proof my grandson learned that family isn't a quarterly projection." Silence filled the room. Adrian looked like he'd been hit by a truck. I tried to process the fact that Edmund had just attempted to mandate reproduction from beyond the grave. "There's more," Marcus continued. "To Ravenna Chun, I leave the following: the brownstone at 247 West 78th Street. My gasp was audible. That property was worth at least $8 million, along with a trust fund of $5 million earmarked specifically for her design studio, with a stipulation that she actually opened said studio within 1 year because, again quoting Edmund, talent wasted on survival is tragedy. Ravenna's too gifted to spend her life on corporate logos for companies without souls." I couldn't breathe. Couldn't process. $8 million in property. $5 million for the business I'd only dreamed about. Edmund had given me the means to build exactly the life I'd told Adrian I wanted that night over pasta carbonara. "Finally," Marcus said, Edmund left instructions for this to be read aloud in front of witnesses. "To Adrian and Ravenna, I knew from the beginning your marriage started as performance. I'm old, not senile. But I watched you transform that performance into something real, something worth building on. The conditions in this will aren't meant to trap you. They're meant to give you permission to build the life you're both too afraid to claim without external justification. Adrian, you need someone to remind you you're human. Ravenna, you need resources to stop just surviving and start living. Together, you make each other better. Don't waste it." The silence after Marcus finished was profound. Board members looked confused. Distant relatives looked disappointed. Clearly they'd hoped for different outcomes. Isadora stood up and left without a word, her heels clicking sharply against hardwood. Adrian turned to me, his expression complicated. He basically mandated our entire future. He gave us resources and suggested possibilities. There's a difference. Is there? Because I'm looking at conditions that require we stay married for 5 years and have children. That's not a suggestion. No, I agreed. But it's also not a contract. We could walk away. Refuse the inheritance. You'd lose the company, but you'd be free. He studied my face for a long moment. Is that what you want? I'm asking what you want. We spent months in a fake relationship governed by terms and conditions. I won't do that again, even if the terms come from someone who loved us. Adrian glanced around the room full of people waiting to see how the great Adrian Blackthorne would respond to his grandfather's final chess move. Everyone out, he said suddenly. This conversation doesn't require an audience. Marcus raised an eyebrow but began ushering people toward the door. Within minutes, the office was empty except for Adrian and me. He took both my hands, his gray eyes serious. I'm terrified of marriage. Real marriage, not performance. I'm terrified of being a father. My own father was absent even when he was alive, and Edmund, for all his brilliance, was better at business than parenting. I'm terrified that I'll fail at this the way I've failed at every relationship I've ever attempted. Okay. He looked startled. That's your response? You're terrified. I'm terrified. Welcome to being human. I squeezed his hands. But here's the thing, Edmund didn't mandate our feelings. He mandated structure that gives us space to figure out if what we have can survive actual life instead of crisis. 5 years to learn to be married. 7 years to decide if we want children. Those aren't prisons. They're possibilities. What if I'm terrible at this? Then you'll be terrible at it with someone who loves you anyway. Someone who's also terrible at it in completely different ways. I smiled despite the weight of what we were discussing. I don't want the inheritance if it turns us back into a transaction. But if you want to try, if you want to actually build something real with the resources Edmund provided, then I'm willing to risk it. Adrian was quiet for a long time, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. I want the company. Not for ego or wealth, I have enough of both. But Edmund built Blackthorne Enterprises from nothing. It's his legacy. Walking away feels like dishonoring everything he worked for. Then don't walk away. But the conditions are suggestions for the future, not mandates for today. We take it one decision at a time. We try to stay married because we want to, not because a will requires it. If we decide we want children someday, it'll be because we chose that, not because Edmund threatened your inheritance. I moved closer. But Adrian? I need you to be honest. Do you want this? Or do you want what Edmund wanted for you? He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me like I was the only solid thing in a shifting world. I want you. Specifically you, stubborn and brilliant and calling me out when I'm being impossible. I want to wake up next to someone who knows the worst parts of me and chooses to stay anyway. I want to build something that isn't measured in quarterly returns. I want, his voice dropped, I want to try being happy instead of just successful. That's the most terrifying thing you've ever said. I know. He pulled back to look at me. So? Will you marry me? Actually marry me, not the contract version. No conditions except that we try to figure this out together. I pretended to consider it. That depends. Are you going to keep Googling how to be a better listener? Probably. Will you panic and self-sabotage when things get too good? Almost certainly. Will you work too much and forget important dates and struggle with basic emotional expression? Without question. Then yes. Obviously yes. I kissed him, and it still felt like falling and flying simultaneously. But I'm opening that design studio. And you're going to therapy. And we're both going to learn that love isn't something you optimize, it's something you practice. Deal. No. I pulled back. Not a deal. Not a transaction. Not a performance. Just two damaged people choosing each other daily and hoping that's enough. Is it? Enough. I thought about my mother, cancer-free now thanks to treatment Adrian had funded. About the brownstone Edmund had left me, space enough for a studio, for a life, for possibilities I'd stopped letting myself imagine. About the man in front of me who'd gone from seeing feelings as liabilities to actively choosing vulnerability. I don't know, I said honestly. But I think the trying is the entire point. 6 months later, I stood in the brownstone Edmund had left me, surrounded by the chaos of construction. We were transforming it into exactly what I dreamed, a design studio on the first floor, living space above, room for the life Adrian and I were slowly, imperfectly building together. Adrian appeared in the doorway, still wearing his suit from work but tie loosened, carrying takeout from the Thai place I loved. How was the city planning meeting, he asked, setting food on the makeshift table we constructed from sawhorses and plywood. Bureaucratic nightmare. But they approved the zoning variance. I wiped plaster dust from my hands. We can officially open for business in 3 months. I hired my first employee today. Mei Lin, brilliant illustrator, fresh out of Pratt, needs an opportunity. I smiled. Turns out having resources means being able to give other people chances. Edmund would approve. Adrian looked around the space, raw and under construction but full of potential. He would have loved this. Seeing you build something. He gave me the means to build it. The least I can do is make it worth his investment. We ate in comfortable silence, surrounded by the bones of the future we were constructing. My phone buzzed, my mother, texting from her latest adventure. She'd started traveling now that cancer wasn't holding her hostage, sending me photos from national parks and small towns, living the life she deferred for decades. My therapist asked about the 5-year requirement, Adrian said suddenly. Whether it feels like pressure. We'd been married for 2 months, a small ceremony with just immediate family and Marcus, who'd cried through the entire thing despite being a 70-year-old corporate attorney who'd probably seen everything twice. No performance. No staged photos. Just 2 people promising to try. What did you tell them? That I stopped counting time in years and started counting it in days. Good days, hard days, days where we figure it out and days where we absolutely don't. He reached for my hand across our makeshift table. That loving you isn't something I'm waiting to get good at in 5 years. It's something I'm practicing daily and failing at regularly. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said, and it's still somehow a cost-benefit analysis. I'm a work in progress. We both are. Outside, Brooklyn moved through its evening rhythms. Inside, surrounded by construction dust and takeout containers and the beautiful mess of actually building a life, Adrian Blackthorne and I sat together, 2 people who'd started as a transaction and ended up as something infinitely more complicated and real. Edmondsville had given us resources. But we'd given ourselves permission, to be imperfect, to try anyway, to transform performance into partnership. And that, it turned out, was the real inheritance. Not the money or the company or the brownstone with its possibilities. But the courage to build something real from the ashes of something fake. To choose each other daily instead of once. To understand that love wasn't a return on investment, but an investment worth making regardless of return. By the way, Adrian said as we cleaned up our dinner debris, I've been thinking about Edmund's other condition. The children thing. My heart stuttered. And I'm terrified. Absolutely terrified. I have no idea how to be a father. My role models range from absent to emotionally unavailable. I'll probably traumatize any theoretical children we might hypothetically have. Sounds about right. But, he pulled me close, if we're going to practice being imperfect together, might as well practice all of it. Not now. Not for a while. But someday when we figured out some of this other stuff, maybe we could try being terrible at parenting together. I thought about Edmund's words, about family not being a quarterly projection. About the life we were building in this brownstone, brick by imperfect brick. About the studio downstairs where I'd teach young designers that survival wasn't the goal, creation was. About Adrian's slow transformation from man who saw feelings as liabilities to man who actively chose vulnerability. Yeah, I said. Someday. When we're ready to fail at something new together. It's a date. It's not a date. It's a future possibility pending mutual agreement and appropriate timing. He laughed, the real laugh I'd fought so hard to earn, not the corporate version he used in board meetings. I love you. Have I mentioned that today? Once. During breakfast. While explaining venture capital trends. Romantic as ever. You knew what you were signing up for. Actually, he said, pulling me toward the door, toward home, toward whatever came next, I had absolutely no idea. Best decision I ever made. And standing there in the brownstone Edmund had left me, holding the hand of the man I'd been hired to pretend to love and ended up loving anyway, I realized something crucial. The best investments weren't measured in returns. They were measured in transformations. The way people changed each other, shaped each other, became better versions of themselves through proximity and choice and the daily decision to try. Edmund had known that. Had built his entire final will around that truth. And now, surrounded by construction dust and possibility, Adrian and I were learning it too. One imperfect day at a time. From fake marriage to real love. Do you believe they'll actually make it long term? Predict their future.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.